Let's take this to South Africa, where the partner and West Africa tax leader for Deloitte Nigeria, Yomi Olugbonro, is joining us via Skype. Good afternoon in South Africa, in Joburg. It's lunchtime. Hope you've had some lunch, Yomi. If not, let's have this as lunch together. Give us a sense. You spent a few days in South Africa, and what are you hearing? What's the discussion down there as far as what is happening in Nigeria is concerned? Not the political side, not who buys what form for how much, but in terms of the regulatory sanctions.
All right. Good morning, Bosin, and good morning, viewers. Well, I think the mood here is perhaps the same as you have in the country. Each time you have multinational being levied with fines and penalties, the discussion is always around whether these rules are clear and known ahead of time, or whether this is witch hunt, you know, and those kind of conversations. So I do not think multinationals should just be spared just because we don't want them to complain. I think what's probably just important is clarity of rules, so that both the tax authority, both the multinational companies and the tax-paying public knows exactly what the rules are, and everybody can make an objective conclusion as to when when there's an infraction.
This is the time that the Nigerian authority is working very hard to bring more revenue via tax, and big companies they create jobs. They make the heavy tax, not the little naira and kobo that folks like myself pay on our personal income tax. So those who pay hundreds of millions in naira and in dollars doing business in Nigeria, how do we place the current? We're just coming from the voluntary asset declaration, then we go to transfer pricing tax, then this.
Well, that's right. I think multinationals are quite aware that tax is a consequence of the profit they're doing. So I don't think any multinational company is going to shy away from that. In fact, it's part of the variables that need to be plotted into the business model when you're doing your visibility study and all of your projections. But I think concerns arises where those rules are not clear enough, when they are not given ahead of time, and when somehow administrative lapses, sometimes on the part of regulatory authorities, are pushed down the throat of taxpayer and making it appear to the taxing public or the unsuspecting public as if all of these are deliberate infraction. I think it would be unfair to paint every multinational company with the same brush. Some are reporting as fairly as they need to within the laws. And some, are involved in shortchanging the government, so we can deny that. And this is not limited to Nigeria, we must say. You hear cases of large corporates, of VIPs, of celebrities, different organizations being accused of tax fraud all over the world. So some of them are outright illegal, but some just stretch the law to unimaginable limits. So what is done everywhere in the world is that areas of abuses are studied by tax authorities and by government, and changes are effected in legislation to prevent them. It's almost like what Chinua Achebe said in Things Fall Apart. So when the hunter have learned how to shoot without missing, the bird also needs to constantly learn how to fly without perching. So the government has the power of legislation. So loopholes are studies and changes are made. And that's exactly what I think is happening all around the world with all of the conversations we're having around transfer pricing regulation, country by country reporting, automatic exchange of information, the BEPS action plan and all of that. So there is a concerted global effort at tackling all of these infractions by multinationals. And the dividing line is shrinking between what is tax avoidance and tax planning versus what is outright tax evasion.
Yes, I understand that, because the wave in the last couple of months globally, whether via the OECD or the new agreement signed, Nigeria having a lot of tax illicit chasing illicit financial flows, having handshakes across jurisdictions like the UK, other European and the US is just quite significant. So how do you think companies should begin to realize the new order, as it were, around the way they do business when the headquarters is somewhere and they're having footprint in another country and they're dealing with different political, regulatory environments and nuances?
Right. I think that it's business unusual. Like I put out in a tweet yesterday, for multinationals operating not only in Nigeria but all around the world, because what Nigeria is doing is perhaps to just key into the global movement. It's a concerted effort by all the taxing authorities and all the government around the world to fight aggressive tax avoidance or tax evasion. So we have on our hands now the revised transfer pricing regulation, which is already in effect. We have the country-by-country reporting, which already starts with effect from 1st of January. So what all of this is saying is that the business arrangement within the group entity, so if you have a multinational company that is headquartered in Nigeria or have an operating entity that is tax resident in Nigeria, there are now specific reporting obligations that are aimed at getting how fair is the amount of tax that the Nigerian government is getting from that multinational's business interest in the country. So gone are the days when multinationals could use, the transfer pricing protocol or process to move profit from one jurisdiction to the other and assume that Nigeria authority hasn't got the power or the wherewithal to trace where tax is paid or if tax is paid at all in any of the jurisdictions. So yesterday, the Federal Inland Revenue Service came up with a disclosure form or the notification form, which is part of the country-by-country regulation that we just had. So before the end of the calendar year of a multinational company, you're supposed to notify the Revenue Authority, for example, if you are the ultimate parent company of a multinational entity or if you're a constituent entity. And if you're not the ultimate parent company and you are not the surrogate parent entity, you need to provide adequate information to the Revenue Authority as to which of the member entity within the group has the reporting obligation. So you need to do that. And no later than 1 year after your year end, you must make some disclosure to some reports, some returns to the Revenue Authority, which will include information like your revenue, your profit, the taxes you paid, the capital you employed in each of the locations where you are operating, the head count, the assets you employed, and the group structure, such that in Nigeria, for example, the tax authority could see the entire business flow within the group and see how much of revenue you have derived from Nigeria, what is the level of your capitalization in the country, what is the amount of assets, tangible assets you have within the country, and how do we relate that to the amount of profit. So the idea is that, the amount of tax you paid in the country, for example. So the idea is that group structure that allow businesses to shift profit to locations just because they want to take advantage of favorable tax regime in those locations or cheat a particular national government is no longer going to be possible. And if you fail to do that, there are very strict penalty, unlike what we used to have before, which was almost like a slap on the wrist. You had a multinational company to pay 25,000 naira for failing to file a return, or pay 5,000 naira for every month. Somebody could close his eyes and allow that infraction to continue for decades without having any impact. So the penalties are now revised to make them a little more punitive. It's still low in some quarter by some people. If, for example, if you look at the transfer pricing regulation, if you fail to file returns or you declare incorrect returns, you're likely going to be subject to, just for penalty alone, maybe 10 million naira or 1% of the value of the transaction that is covered. And for every month or every day that infraction continue, you pay about 10,000 naira or thereabout per day. This is just penalty. It doesn't mean that the amount of taxes you may be owing will still not be added. So the rules are changing, and the idea is that multinationals need to step up their game in being responsible corporate citizens in the area of taxation. So they need to comply with both the letter and the spirit of the law. Otherwise, they're just going to find themselves on the wrong side of the law.
A very broad, in-depth insight there from you, Benro. But again, if you look at Nigeria, where foreign direct investment does not come in like a heavy rainfall. It comes in trickles. So we don't get as much as other African countries are getting. Not like Egypt, not like Kenya, maybe not even Ghana, nor South Africa. So we're getting this foreign direct investment in trickles. So folks are beginning to ask, is it that yes, we have to implement the law globally, locally, we have to domesticate it, but do you think we need to adjust? Some folks say we should communicate better. Perhaps some of these regulatory actions shouldn't be on the front pages of newspapers and news headlines and headlines in a network, a news network like channels or and elsewhere. Do you think we can temper things a little bit? Some folks says we could have perhaps backdoor arrangement in which the sanctions take place, but the rest of us on the front desk are unaware.
Well, both things is a chicken and an egg, and I relate quite a lot with many multinationals. And when it comes to the issue of tax, there's a distinction between if there are incentives, deliberate incentives that a government put in place to be able to attract FDI, for example, and those incentives are typically targeted at specific critical sector, and we have a number of that within our law, even in spite of all of this noise and cry around transfer pricing and country-by-country reporting. I do not think that these regulations are creating new taxes by themselves. Transfer pricing regulation is not a new line of tax. We haven't changed the headline tax rate, for example, from the 30% that it's always been. So what the government is saying, and the incentive that exists, whether it's pioneer legislation or incentives available if you're operating in economic zones, or certain tax relief that you enjoy as a taxpayer, nothing has happened to any of those. What the government all over the world is doing, and rightly so, is instances where some companies try to stretch the law to limits that are not the intention of the law. How do we curb it? So we can use illegality to promote FDI, in my view, and I'm not sure many multinational actually are asking for that. So, but I agree that when issues become headlines, and I put out a tweet maybe about 2 days ago, for example, when asked about this, that we can't just take the headlines and use that to conclude that a taxpayer is guilty or is innocent. We always need to go below the surface. So I agree that we shouldn't sensationalize headlines because it communicates different vibes to both intending investors and those who are already within. But should we, ask companies and taxpayers operating within the country, for example, to comply with the law? I agree absolutely. But it shouldn't be witch hunt. It shouldn't be arbitrary. We shouldn't pass on inefficiency of the system and label that to be misgivings or misdoing by taxpayer. Tax is an obligation, person.
That's well understood. That's well understood, Yomi. Thank you so much for your thoughts this morning, balancing it as it were. Thank you very much, Yomi Olugbero from Johannesburg in South Africa, partner and West Africa tax leader of Deloitte, Nigeria.